Hope in Star Wars is presented as the galaxy's most precious resource, yet the way it is deployed reveals a quieter and more troubling function. It is consistently outsourced upward, away from ordinary people and institutions, and concentrated into singular figures whose existence allows everyone else to wait. From childhood onward, the galaxy is conditioned to believe that change arrives from elsewhere. A Jedi will return, a pilot will make the impossible shot, a legend will rise when the darkness is greatest, and this belief trains populations not to organize, prepare, or resist, but to endure. Endurance becomes a moral virtue, waiting is reframed as faith, and passivity is softened by the promise that help is coming, even when there is no evidence that it is, or that it will arrive in time. Hope shifts from a collective action into a narrative expectation, something that exists in speeches and symbols rather than logistics, alliances, or infrastructure. And because it feels emotionally sustaining, it substitutes for the harder work of preparation. The galaxy speaks the language of hope fluently, but practices it poorly. Rallies are held, banners raised, stories told, yet defences remain underfunded, treaties untested, and evacuation plans non-existent. Rebellions thrive on symbols because symbols travel faster than solutions. A single hero's image can ignite belief across systems, but belief alone does not build fleets, feed refugees, or fortify borders. The focus on iconic figures creates a dangerous asymmetry. Millions are inspired, yet only a handful are empowered. The rest are positioned as witnesses rather than participants in their own survival. This imbalance is visible in every era. Citizens cheer the return of the Jedi, the fall of the Emperor, or the rise of the Resistance, while remaining structurally dependent on forces they cannot influence or replace. Hope becomes something that happens to people, not something they generate, a feeling delivered from above rather than a practice cultivated from below. Faith replaces preparation in countless systems. Worlds delay defensive measures because they believe neutrality will protect them, or that intervention will arrive before catastrophe. And when it does not, collapse feels sudden but was structurally inevitable. Planetary governments hesitate to invest in alliances or armaments because doing so signals fear or provocation, and hope offers a cheaper alternative. Trust in destiny, trust in heroes. Trust that history will repeat its happier moments. When worlds fall, the language used afterward reveals the lie. They are described as tragic losses rather than predictable outcomes of inaction, and responsibility dissolves into abstraction. Hope functions as emotional relief. It allows beings to cope with uncertainty without demanding change, to feel morally aligned without materially contributing, and to believe in survival without planning for it. This emotional satisfaction is powerful. It quiets dissent, smooths over anxiety, and creates unity through shared belief. But it also anesthetizes urgency, delaying the moment when difficult decisions must be made. The saga repeatedly shows that by the time hope arrives in physical form, entire systems have already collapsed, fleets destroyed, populations displaced, and cultures erased. The hero wins the battle, but the war's cost has already been paid by someone else. People die while hope is on the way, and the narrative treats this as tragic but unavoidable, reinforcing the idea that waiting was reasonable, even noble, despite its consequences. Survival within this galaxy often favours those who are sceptical rather than faithful. Smugglers, senators who compromise, civilians who hide, and leaders who plan for the worst tend to last longer than those who believe purely in ideals. This does not make them virtuous, but it makes them functional, and the contrast exposes the gap between what the galaxy celebrates and what it actually rewards. Hope excuses inaction at the highest levels. Leaders delay mobilization, avoid hard choices, and postpone sacrifice, trusting that events will resolve themselves or that heroes will compensate for their hesitation. When disaster strikes, these leaders frame failure as bad luck rather than policy, leaning on hope again to justify the next delay, creating a cycle where belief substitutes for accountability. Every era repeats this pattern with new rhetoric. The Republic promises stability, the rebels promise freedom, the resistance promises survival. Yet each shifts the burden downward while reserving agency for a select few. Ordinary beings are asked to believe, endure, and wait, while responsibility concentrates at the top and consequences spread outward. The galaxy does not actually run on hope. It runs despite it, through improvisation, compromise, and exploitation, while hope functions as a soothing overlay that makes endurance feel meaningful. This disconnect between rhetoric and reality is one of the saga's most persistent tensions. Hope is always present, always celebrated, and yet rarely transformative on its own. By treating hope as sufficient, the galaxy avoids confronting how little has changed structurally between eras. The same vulnerabilities recur because belief never hardened into systems. Hope becomes a promise deferred indefinitely, always just ahead, always almost enough, and never quite demanding the sacrifices required to make it permanent. It is within this space, between belief and action, that the cost of waiting accumulates quietly, setting the stage for repetition rather than resolution, and revealing why the same tragedies continue to unfold despite generations of heroes. Waiting for hope reshapes behaviour long before disaster arrives. It teaches populations to interpret warning signs as tests of faith rather than calls to action, and this reframing quietly converts preventable crises into inevitable tragedies. When early threats emerge, fleets mobilising, borders destabilising, economies straining, the dominant response is not preparation but reassurance. Leaders speak of patience, unity, and belief, soothing fear instead of addressing it, because fear demands change, while hope demands only trust. This dynamic delays intervention until the cost is no longer avoidable. By the time action becomes unavoidable, options have narrowed, sacrifices have multiplied, and the narrative reframes reaction as heroism rather than acknowledging delay as failure. Entire systems collapse during this waiting period, communications fail, supply lines fracture, and civilians are displaced. Yet these losses are rarely attributed to hope itself. They are chalked up to circumstance, bad timing, or the enemy's cruelty. Hope becomes untouchable because criticizing it sounds like cynicism, and cynicism is framed as moral weakness rather than strategic awareness, allowing belief to remain culturally sacred, even when it proves operationally disastrous. Characters who question hope are often sidelined or framed as pessimists. Despite consistently being the ones who understand the stakes most clearly, their caution is narratively inconvenient because it undermines the emotional arc built around faith. Those who survive longest are rarely the pure believers. They are the ones who plan exit routes, hoard resources, forge uncomfortable alliances, or stay quiet until the danger passes. Their survival is pragmatic rather than inspirational. The saga quietly rewards these behaviours, even as it publicly celebrates idealism, creating a split between what is praised and what actually works. A split that reinforces the cycle by keeping effective strategies outside the moral spotlight. At the highest levels, hope becomes a political shield. Leaders invoke it to justify postponement, trusting that the situation will improve without requiring unpopular decisions. And when it does not, they fall back on hope again to maintain legitimacy. This creates a form of moral inertia. Difficult choices are always deferred to tomorrow, because tomorrow is where hope is supposed to arrive, and today is reserved for belief. Each era inherits this mindset, fully intact. Despite knowing how the last one ended, the Republic trusts in stability, the rebels trust in victory, the resistance trusts in survival, and all three mistake hope for preparedness. The language changes, but the structure does not. Responsibility remains concentrated, agency remains scarce, and ordinary beings are once again asked to endure while waiting for deliverance. This repetition reveals that hope, as used in the saga, is not a disruptive force. It is a stabilizing one. It keeps populations compliant, patient, and emotionally invested, even as conditions deteriorate. Hope comforts the powerless precisely because it asks nothing of them except belief, and in doing so it protects the systems that benefit from their patience. The machinery of war, control, and exploitation continues uninterrupted beneath the rhetoric, fueled by resources, labour, and fear, while hope provides the narrative cover that makes this continuation feel tolerable. When heroes finally arrive, they resolve the immediate threat, and hope is declared vindicated. Even though the cost of waiting was catastrophic, the narrative closure erases the ledger. This erasure ensures the lesson is never learned, because the story confirms that waiting worked, despite overwhelming evidence that it failed countless others along the way. hope becomes self-justifying, its success measured only by the survival of the protagonists rather than the survival of the galaxy as a whole. In this way, hope narrows perspective. It prioritizes symbolic survival over collective well-being, allowing the story to declare victory, even as entire populations vanish off-screen. The tragedy is not that hope exists, it is that it is never paired with responsibility. It floats free of systems, planning, and shared burden, becoming a feeling rather than a practice. Star Wars insists that hope is powerful, but repeatedly demonstrates that power without structure is fragile, late, and unevenly distributed. The galaxy does not fall because hope is false. It falls because hope is treated as sufficient, a substitute for preparation rather than a catalyst for it. When hope finally fails outright, the damage is already done, and the cycle resets with a new generation taught the same lesson: believe, wait, endure. This is why the same mistakes recur across centuries, not because the galaxy forgets history, but because it mythologizes it, turning cautionary tales into inspirational legends stripped of their warnings. Hope survives every collapse because it is emotionally necessary, but the galaxy survives despite hope, through compromise, sacrifice, and endurance that rarely receive narrative glory. The saga's greatest irony is that it teaches hope, while showing its limits, celebrating belief while documenting its cost and never quite reconciling the two. In the end, hope remains indispensable but insufficient, a spark that can light action or smother it, depending on whether it is shared as responsibility or outsourced as destiny. Star Wars leaves us with that unresolved tension, a galaxy forever waiting for heroes, forever paying the price for waiting, and forever telling itself that next time, hope will arrive sooner.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.